Welcome to Fireside Chats with Candidates. I'm Joyce Short, and my co-host is Ellen Polovey.
How are you? It's good to see you.
Okay, how are you?
Tricia.
Today, our guest is Tricia Shimamura,
Hey everybody, how are you?
and Tricia is Vice Chair of Community Board 8. She's the co-chair of their Parks and Waterfront Committee. She was Deputy Chief of Staff for Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, and she founded She Will Rise to focus on young women leaders in New York City. She's a mom, she's a social worker, and a community activist, and you'll often see her helping us out with our pantry at the Senior Center. So thanks again for joining us today.
I'm thrilled to be here, and thank you again for putting on these wonderful events. I think it's such a real service to Islanders and to voters across our district.
So I'd like to start with just a couple of quick questions. The first one is, why politics? What prompted you to head your career in this direction?
Sure, it's a good question. I always tell people that I am in so many ways an unlikely candidate running for office. To start, I'm a proud Japanese Puerto Rican running in a district that has never elected a person of color, not on the city, state, or federal level. When we enter the city council, we'll not only be the first person of color to represent our district, but I'm also going to be the first Japanese American ever elected in New York State. And I have to tell you, given the rise of anti-Asian hate across our country and in our city, it's never been more meaningful to me to be running as a Shimamura. Secondly, as you mentioned, Joyce, I'm a mother. A lot of Islanders know this already and folks on the Upper East Side, but just a little less than 2 years ago, I gave birth to my son, Teddy, and I joined the hundreds of thousands of other working families out there who are struggling to balance the demands of work and home. It's never easy running while you have a young child at home, which is probably why we actually only have 2 moms with school-age children in our 51-person city council. And finally, as you also mentioned, I'm a social worker. I did not grow up dreaming of being an elected official. I grew up dreaming of working with women and children. And it was only while I was a school social worker at Sheepshead Bay High School in Brooklyn that I realized that in so many ways, my kids were just set up to fail. They were struggling to navigate a broken education system, broken housing system, broken criminal justice system, frankly, just trying to survive, let alone go to school. And I realized that in that moment, that the only way that we were going to really fix these systems that were just designed to allow some of our most vulnerable to fall through the cracks, we really need to be talking about policy. And that's really where I started to get this idea that maybe I could make a bigger difference if we focused on those larger policy issues, these larger systemic issues that really needed strong legislation and strong leadership in order to fix. There are a lot of reasons why I am not the typical person to run for office, and a lot of the reasons why there's never been somebody who looks like me who's been in this seat. But there's only one reason why I'm actually running, and that's because I love this neighborhood. This is my community. This is my home. It's the only place I want to raise my son. It's the only place I want to be. And I want to do everything I can to make sure working families and seniors and small businesses and every other resident living here have what they need to stay in our city and thrive. After that time working in Sheepshead Bay High School, I then went on to work for Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney's office as her Deputy Chief of Staff. And it was really in that position that I really got to see what it was like to have a strong legislator fighting for a district. In so many ways, it called upon a lot of the skills that I learned as a social worker, just applied to on a larger scale and a larger platform. And ever since then, I've been continuously fighting for our neighborhood. As Ellen knows, we've served on the community board together for many years, from working at the food pantry on Roosevelt Island, which is just my favorite way of spending Friday nights, to serving on the East 72nd Street Neighborhood Association here on the Upper East Side. There's just a lot of ways that I've been really proud to continuously work for and give back to my neighborhood. And it really informs everything that I do. It informs the kind of campaign that we've been running, and I hope the type of legislator that I'm going to be.
Super. Well, you've talked about your platform. So now can we find out what your most important issues are that you feel? What are the issues that are the most important to you on your platform? And
Sure.
how are you going to make a difference in those three issues?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that for our, we've been talking to a lot of residents in the neighborhood for months now. And I think that overwhelmingly, one of the biggest issues that is brought up to us all the time is our recovery from COVID and our affordability crisis. I kind of combine those two things a lot of times because so much of how we recover from COVID is about access to vaccines and staying in our homes and keeping our small businesses alive. All of that kind of is under the larger umbrella of affordability. And I think people are right to be concerned. We've seen folks leave the city because they've lost their jobs and couldn't afford the rent. We've seen every day, unfortunately, our small businesses close. The lines at the food pantry just keep getting longer every week. And so the ability for us to maintain affordability of our neighborhoods, particularly, and hopefully build more deeper affordability, I think is really key. Another issue that we always talk about is our overall resiliency. And Ellen knows this, but I spent years working to strengthen and preserve our East River Esplanade, our parks and open space. We know this, and Roosevelt Islanders know this very well. It is not just pretty open space, and it's nice to be next to flowers, but we know that our parks and open space play a huge role in how we are overall, our resiliency and sustainability. And for a neighborhood that is mostly on the waterfront or surrounded by water, resiliency is really serious for us. It also impacts our seniors in terms of how we are responding to climate change. It impacts our families. It impacts those who are most vulnerable, communities and low-income communities. Of course, we know that some of our largest NYCHA properties in our district are not 400 feet away from the waterfront that is crumbling. So really, issues of resiliency are very critical here. And finally, I'll also broadly that it's about taking care of families. Now, there's a lot that goes underneath that umbrella, but I'm very proud to be talking a lot about universal childcare. It's something that we've spoken a little bit the last time we got together with Islanders, but in our district, childcare costs somewhere between $35,000 and $50,000 a year. Completely, frankly, unobtainable for most families. Additionally, even if you counted up every single childcare spot, every single home care spot in our district, it would only be taking up about 20% of the actual, or filling about 20% of the need in our communities. That means that District 5 is actually, by definition, a childcare desert. It's no wonder we see so many women leaving the workforce completely. I think it was in the fall that we saw across the country over 200,000 jobs lost in 1 month alone. And I think the statistics were that 100% of those jobs were lost by women. Now, I will never believe anybody who tells me that that's not related to childcare being a luxury instead of a right in our country. And instead of the city being a leader on this, we've just continuously built more gaps in service when it comes to childcare. Now, I believe when we talk about economic recovery of our city, yes, it goes back to affordability, but it also goes back to how we're helping women get back to work. And that's only going to be through universal childcare. There's a lot more that, and I'll kind of transition to this. A lot of when I say taking care of families, not only comes back to childcare, but it also comes back to what kind of priority we put on health and wellness in our city, what kind of priority we're looking at when we talk about access to healthcare, high quality healthcare, access to mental health services. And on those issues of health, I've seen a real opportunity to be a leader. Not only am I a social worker, but I'm running to represent Bedpan Alley, which is a term that our state senator Liz Krueger, I think, coined. We do have the honor of representing a lot of hospitals and healthcare facilities. And I do think that given my combination of my social work background, the fact that I am a relatively new mother who just went through the healthcare system, and the fact that we do have a lot of health institutions in our district, position me to be a real strong champion on issues related to health. Now, Ellen and I have talked at length about how I am supportive of the New York Health Act, but in addition to that, I think that I've actually been working already now to build a coalition with other city council candidates across the city to make sure that they are willing to work with me and prioritize the health of New Yorkers once we're in office. The reality is that we're going to have a new mayor, a new borough president. We're going to have a new 35 out of the 51 new seats of the city council are going to be new. So you're really talking about building new relationships here.
Ellen, so now I'm going to pass the torch on to you because I know you have lots of questions for Tricia. So here you go.
Here we go. All of your plans are pretty awesome. You're a true social worker, and it's not just when you say social worker, you're not just speaking semantically, you're speaking in a way that explains that you think holistically about all your plans for the city, that you look at a person-centered approach, and you look at how all your plans are going to affect the humans that have to interact with them. And I really, they were so robust, each one of them. I don't even know where to start, but I would like to start with public safety, because we've just finished interviewing all the district attorney candidates, and we're going to have a new district attorney that is hopefully focused on reducing the impact of police in communities of color. And you talk about education and the school to prison pipeline that you see in the public schools, which is terrifying to me. I didn't realize that there was a school to prison pipeline in public schools. So could you explain that and what you would do to change that?
Oh, sure. So first of all, thank you so much, Ellen. You're so kind to read over all of our policies. If you don't know, I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to talking about policies and diving deep into this. And so it's been a real pleasure and very just satisfying to be able to talk about these policies and put out these really thoughtful, I hope, thoughtful pieces on our website. I, at my core, got my start as a public school social worker working in Sheepshead Bay High School, a high school that no longer exists because it was closed. We were working with some of the most truant youth. And so when we talk about the school to prison pipeline, I'm talking about students who go straight from the school setting to ultimately being incarcerated. And so much of that is, I believe, through the systems that, as I was just saying to Joyce, are put in place that are just designed to, unfortunately, let some of our most vulnerable fall through the cracks. I have said before about, in terms of reforming how we think about public safety, or reforming how we look and view public safety. A lot of it comes back to my experiences in the public school system. I think, frankly, it's kind of crazy that we somehow have enough money for a cop in every school, but we don't have enough money for a social worker or a nurse in every school. So many of our students during the pandemic experienced education in different ways, depending on what your situation was, and whether or not you had an IEP, whether or not that IEP was met. So many of these different pieces that now more than ever, I think that in order to help our students get back on track, we really need to be making those big investments in services that will really help them succeed. In addition to that, I do think I take a very social work approach to how we look at public safety. I've long said that I take a public health approach to public safety, and I've long said that I take a community-centered approach to how we think about safety in our neighborhoods. I frankly think that we need to bring together our small businesses, our communities of color, our low-income communities, families, seniors, other residents, to come together with the PD to talk about what public safety looks like in our neighborhood. Because I think it's probably different, frankly, than it's different here, and there are different needs here than in other neighborhoods. And I think that in everything that I do, I'm about bringing more people to the table. I'm about engaging more communities that have been overlooked and overshadowed, to really have a voice in the process of shaping how their communities feel, how their communities operate, and that sort of thing. That's where my focus is, and I do think I'm trying to at least put actions behind my words in terms of what it really means to be a social worker running for office.
Great, thank you. So you wanted to refocus on recovering after COVID. And then you mentioned that many of the students have been, well, all the students have been homeschooled for the last year. And now we're getting back into schools. And you've got the problem of, I'm trying to tie this all together, you've got the problem of some of the students didn't have proper homeschooling because the parents were otherwise engaged or otherwise occupied, and everybody was under stress, and some people didn't have proper supports at home. So how do you plan to, even if the social workers get involved, even if school nurses get involved, what are the plans to solve this problem?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that we need to have all of our students going back to school full time as soon as possible. I say this as a parent, and I say as somebody who has had my son home with us for several months, and I also say this as an advocate. I think that we need our kids back in school, and I'm excited that we're moving in that direction. But I think we could have done it sooner. Second of all, I think that now is not the time where we skimp or cut budgets for after school programming, for tutoring programs, for additional care. I think that we do need more aides in the classrooms. I think that we do need to look towards our nonprofit sector to help support our families, but we need every single support that we can possibly get to make sure that our students are catching up and really fully supported. Now, the truth is that we need to get better than where we were before the pandemic, because even before the pandemic, we had families who were struggling. Ellen, you and I talk about this a lot, but my heart particularly goes out to our families with students with IEPs, because unfortunately, sure, they're individual educational plans. They are for any student who requires any sort of specialized educational services. Students with specific learning disabilities, students who require smaller class sizes in order to learn, students who may be on the spectrum slightly or somewhat in order to and have specific learning needs. They are set out by an IEP. Now, our entire educational plan and my entire educational perspective comes back to this idea that every child, regardless of their ability level, regardless if they require a high rigorous setting or have an IEP and require some sort of specialized care, deserve to have their educational and academic needs met in our public school system. And the truth is that even before the pandemic, that wasn't happening. We have students in our district, District 2, which is a very good school district, who have had IEP needs set out 4 years ago and are still waiting for those needs to be met. We have students who, Ellen, and you and I talked about this, who require very small class sizes and very specialized care, who have been failed completely by our public school education system. And I just read an article a couple weeks ago saying that in the pandemic, this has only gotten worse. They are estimating that huge chunks of our population of students with learning needs were just completely left out in this last year of receiving any sort of services. And so you can see how these disparities are only growing larger. I think to combat that and to change course here and really bring some real equity to our education system, we need a social work perspective. We need someone who's going to know firsthand the power of social services in our schools, who's going to fight to make sure that we have those after school programs, that we actually have those tutoring services, that we are pushing for universal broadband, because we know that not all of our kids even had access to the internet or could even participate in remote education, who are really going to look towards building a community school model where our schools become more so community hubs than anything else, and really kind of changing how we think about our public education system, which I will always say I know firsthand has truly, unfortunately, failed some of our most vulnerable students.
So you can't really disappear a student. They're going to go somewhere. If you don't serve them, they're going to go to prison, or going to be homeless. They're going to not be able to survive as an adult. So you really have to serve them when they're young.
I 100% agree. And this goes back to, honestly, it goes back to way before high school, which is what the population I worked with. But really, you set the tone for a child's outcome way earlier. When you're talking about outcomes, you're talking about, that's why I talk about universal childcare so much. The ability to get high quality childcare early on just helps improve outcomes for everybody. It's not just the child, but it's the family as well. So it's really looking, as you said, holistically at the larger picture here. When we talk about after school services, we're not just talking about what happens to a kid between 3 and 6 p.m. We're talking about whether or not a parent can go to work. We're talking about whether or not that parent can then get healthy meals on the table, whether or not they are able to stay in the home, in their housing that they have, or whether or not they have to get shifted to someplace else. We're talking about health outcomes here. We're talking about economic recovery. So it's way more than just, and we're talking about helping this child engage and better communicate and get just holistically compassionate and enriching programs. It's so much more than just one thing. And I'm really in my policy papers, I'm trying to focus on kind of the forest through the trees sort of thing when it comes to what these policies are putting out.
So you talked about universal childcare, which is different than what we now have, which is universal pre-K. So you're talking about a couple of years younger than universal pre-K. You're talking about actual childcare, and so that the parents could start going to work sooner. The women could start, usually it's the women that take care of the children. They could get back into the workforce sooner. Now, this is very important. I just want to say that we also have you call it a childcare desert. I in the elder care field have a home attendant desert.
Yep.
Those home attendants that have little children, they can't work. They can't get out because they have to take care of their little children. And so, and they don't want to travel for 2 hours from Brooklyn to Manhattan to work for 3 hours for visiting nurse, because that's all that the visiting nurse service is going to give you. So we need to have universal health care so that we can get the number of hours that somebody that a home attendant services that an older adult actually needs. But besides that, we need to have universal childcare so that a home attendant can actually leave their child somewhere, get out of the house and do their job so that the older adult can get the services that they need. So it all works as a big unit. And you're coming up with ideas that would actually work to solve the problem. And I love it. Would you just tell us more about your universal childcare idea?
What age would you start universal childcare at?
So, universal childcare would generally start at 12 weeks, and 12 weeks and going through to 3 years. That's normally where most daycares and childcare start. But Ellen, I wish I could hug you in person, because I completely agree with you. I'm very proud to be ranked first by the political arm of Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, called the Jewish Vote. And it's because particularly of my commitment towards investing in the care economy. That is what, Ellen, you are referring to when we talk about all of the care workers in our city who are doing some of the most essential work at a fraction of what they of what they should be paid. But from our home care workers to our child care workers, these are essential services that truly we are not paying enough attention to. These are the same services that did not get protections when COVID started. They are the same services that are still, like I said before, getting paid a fraction of what they actually need to go through. And we don't run. They also take care of some of our most vulnerable New Yorkers. I mean, truly, I believe that we should be judged by how we care for our most vulnerable. And that goes back to how we invest in our care economy. Now, Ellen, what you're talking about, you're 100% right. I mean, our home healthcare workers, we, if anything, need to do everything we can to strengthen and support this industry, which is through passing the New York Health Act and through increasing pay and through increasing the amount of support that they have. But my idea also, I believe, helps support our home healthcare workers, because you're right. These are predominantly women who are our home healthcare workers, who have children of their own, who have no real, there are just no real supports for you. Joyce, your question of when does this start? You know, that's the key question right there, because right now, the city just announced that starting soon, hopefully in our district, we will have 3K, meaning that when your child is 3 years old, you will have access, hopefully, to high quality free daycare at 3 years old. But what happens between 12 weeks and 3 years old? That's the big question. And trust me, I'm in that period right now. Let me just tell you, there are very few supports out there, really nothing. As I said, that's where our numbers come from. When I say it costs between $35,000 and $50,000 a year, that's what it costs to take care of a 12-week-old. That's what it costs to take care of a 2-year-old. And honestly, when I tell that number to kids to parents on the playground, they laugh and tell me try $60,000 a year in our neighborhood. It is astronomical. And like I said, even if you did have the money, which is great, and I'm happy that you do, then you're still stuck on waiting lists, because at the end of the day, we still don't have enough spots to fill the needs of our families in this neighborhood. So when you create supports for universal childcare, where at 12 weeks, because normally, you have, if you have any sort of maternity leave, or this is part of a larger plan, but I'm saying that we should have supports for our mothers who are healing from giving birth through 12 weeks. That's normally the kind of standard amount of time, unless you have a health issue. It's a standard amount of time that you would need to generally get back on your feet. And if you are going back to work at that time, then we should have supports there for you at 12 weeks, so that you can actually have an option for your child should you decide to go back to work. I'll just share that I didn't have many options. I had 10 weeks off, and then I had to go back to work, and my husband and I struggled for, well, we're almost at 2 years. So we continue to struggle to find realistic, affordable, high quality options to take care of our son, whom I love more than life itself. But I love him, and I want him to grow up in this community that I love dearly. This is the only place that I want to be, but I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place when there are no options. Mom has to go to work in order for us to afford the apartment. But then what happens to the baby? And what happens when childcare costs more than rent, which is the case in our situation? That is the actual case in our situation. So Ellen, you're so right. This is really not a women's issue, and this isn't a family issue. It is an economic issue. When we provide universal childcare when we provide affordable childcare for our families, we are stimulating our economy. We are having a trickle-down effect to all of these other pieces of the puzzle, including our home healthcare workers, including other pieces of the care economy. And that is why I am such a big proponent of this, because this is not a siloed issue. This is something that's going to improve outcomes for our entire city.
I want to talk about the seniors, because we're talking about human issues here, and seniors, we're talking the lifespan. Seniors are also living in our community, and you have quite a list of ideas that to help seniors. So could you go into a little bit of detail with that? And
sure,
seniors know how you would help them.
Sure. So I will just say at the beginning of this that I think it's one of my biggest disappointments in running this race is that I think I am not asked about senior issues enough. This is a Democratic primary, and we do a lot of forums, we do a lot of questionnaires. And frankly, I'm always sad to go through forums and not be asked about this. So thank you, because this is I think one of the most critical topics to talk about is how we take care of our seniors. I have a pretty broad range of priorities when it comes to taking care of seniors. Everything from increasing the ability and affordability of our housing, to looking at accessibility of our transit system, our accessibility of our parks there. But I think I want to spend just a minute talking about food insecurity for our seniors, because that's something that we see I deal with most personally on Roosevelt Island every week. The truth is that every week we see over 200 individuals who are mostly seniors. The vast majority are seniors, many times immigrants who are in line waiting for emergency food services through the food pantry. That line has not, if anything, has grown longer. And the truth is that when we saw COVID hit, not only did we see seniors being disproportionately impacted because of just the nature of COVID and being stuck in their homes, we saw a delay of healthcare maintenance, meaning that seniors were not going to get their teeth cleaned or go to their regular checkups. There we saw a lot of anxiety, isolation, depression happening. But we also saw an increase in people experiencing food insecurity, even if you didn't actually think of yourself as experiencing food insecurity. So really, when it comes to taking care of our seniors, I think that we need to be investing in our food services. We need to be investing in our senior centers. We also need to be, and I say this, looking at how we support our nonprofits and how we are helping with overhead, which is a very wonky issue, but I'm happy to talk about that more, in the future.
Okay, so seniors live on probably less than $2,000 a month, so it's impossible to pay for rent, food, and all the other living expenses, and healthcare on that kind of income. So,
I mean, let me just also say very quickly, because this is so important to me, but the last time I checked, the Department of the Aging had a list of over 2,000 people long, I think it was 3,000 people long, who were octogenarians or above, who are waiting for a caseworker for 2 years. The fact is that those 3,000 people will likely pass away without having access to a caseworker, because the city has failed to appropriately fund the Department of the Aging. That is just painful for me to think about. As a social worker and as somebody who does work at the food pantry every Friday, it is painful for me to think that because we have failed to appropriately value our seniors and the Department of the Aging, that we have thousands of seniors who are just waiting to talk to a caseworker who will be unable to do so. So big issue.
Oh, it's a lot worse than that.
Yeah.
People are going to end up relying on the ISEP program, which is the in-home services for the elderly, rather than getting Medicaid, because of the changes that are coming through the pike on Medicaid that have been delayed by COVID, but will start somewhere in September or January. So it's going to get worse. So I'm hoping City Council can do something to help that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do too.
Roosevelt Island issues. So you've been around Roosevelt Island for, over 10, 12 years, since you've been with Carolyn Maloney, and since you worked with us on the Cornell issue, when Cornell was coming, and we were working on making sure that they were going to be a good neighbor. Joyce and I were with you on that. So
I remember.
Could you tell us what you know about Roosevelt Island issues, and what are our needs, and what you will do?
I mean, look, I've long loved Roosevelt Island since I was working as Deputy Chief of Staff to Congresswoman Maloney. I remember being with you and Joyce and others at that Cornell task force where I saw Islanders fight for every single tree. I saw them fight for clean air, for their storefronts. I saw them really advocate for their neighborhoods. It's been a real honor to to serve the island since that time. I've loved, like I said, working at the food pantry every week. I've loved being working with Wendy Hirsch and Mary and others to really provide a real service for Islanders. There are a lot of needs on Roosevelt Island, but I'm going to say broadly, to try to keep this quick or short, is that Islanders have long suffered from lack of representation. It's been hard to see, to hear time and time again, I can't do anything for you because that's a state issue, because it's a REOC issue, because everything comes down from Albany. And I do think that as a city council member, we need to have strong partnerships with the state so that we can really get some stronger representation on issues that really matter. We don't have a bank on Roosevelt Island right now, which is so frustrating. We have empty storefronts on Roosevelt Island, which I know are hopefully getting filled, but we still need to keep those stores open. We have an ongoing restoration of the seawall that needs to be overseen to make sure that it's happening appropriately, that we're not losing any sort of open open space that would be permanent there. We have ongoing concerns, like I said, with the food pantry. Even right now, as Carter Burden is reopening, we're in constant conversations about where is the food pantry going? Where is the new location going to be? Is it going to be accessible to all of our neighbors who are coming through every single week? And so there are just a lot of issues that are, and even funding for the school, funding for our school on the island as well for various projects. There's countless issues. And the truth is that it comes back to having a strong representative who knows the island, who has been there, who Islanders can trust. And I do believe that I can be a strong advocate for Roosevelt Island, because I have been. I'm here constantly. I was also there advocating for vaccine access when Roosevelt Island was left out of that. We are very excited that you're going to have an early voting site this year on Roosevelt Island, but we just constantly need to be making sure that Islanders have a strong voice in the city and state government. I will say that at this point, I'm very proud to be endorsed by our state senator, our state assemblywoman, Rebecca Seawright, who I know is a strong advocate for Roosevelt Island. Very proud to be endorsed by Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, by State Senator Liz Krueger, and even by our former council member Jessica Lappin, who I know have all been strong advocates for the island in the past. And I will continue to be. Somebody asked me what happens after the election if I would stop being at the food pantry, and I said no. That's my gig. That's what I do. It's my way of being on the island every week. It's the folks that work at Rita are like family to me. So I'll be there. I'll be there now. I'll be there next week. I'll be there the following week. I'm not going to stop serving Roosevelt Island anytime. And it doesn't matter what happens with this election. This is my home, and I'm going to take care of it to the best of my ability to.
We're also, Tricia, working at the injection site when we got the vaccines.
Oh yes, I forgot about that. But yes, we were. I love that job. I was passing out I'm vaccinated stickers. So I was like the best. It was the best job because I got to talk to people on the other side. It was wonderful.
Tricia, thank you so much for joining us today. And we wish you all the best of good luck. I want to remind our viewers that the election takes place on June 22nd. And your vote is your voice. So please use it loud and clear. And so we get the best representation possible for Roosevelt Island, for our community, and for the city at large. So thanks again, Tricia, for joining us. And we'll see everybody next time.